planners and bullet journals, art projects, organized planner chic.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Organized Planner Chic. I'm Lucinda, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do so and select the bell for notifications. Well, first, I want to thank all my Patreon members who help make it possible to create videos like this. Well, thank you guys so much, and if you're interested in supporting me on Patreon, just go to patreon.com/organizedplannerchic. Okay, you guys, if you follow my channel, then you know I don't normally do videos like this. I have never done a video that had anything to do with racism. So if you are looking forward to videos on journaling, bullet journaling, crafting, and art, then I will definitely be doing that again in my next video. But God really put it on my heart very strongly to do this video, and I have honestly been fighting hard against it because it's just a difficult thing to talk about, and sometimes people can be mean, and that's just not my heart and not the type of response that I wanted to have. But I have been speaking out some on social media, and it's gone positively, and I'm hoping that I can communicate well and in a loving way about how to approach these discussions on systemic racism from a Christ follower standpoint, or in a Christian loving way. So I do have a few disclaimers that I've written down. So first thing I want to communicate is, yes, I am Black. Sometimes people aren't sure what I am. I am kind of a melting pot of ethnicities, but I am Black. I cannot speak for every Black person. Everyone's experience is not exactly the same. Not everyone interprets similar experiences the same way. So I'm sharing my heart and my perspective, trying to use the words that God has given me. And I have definitely been praying about this. Number 3, I do not believe that every white person is a racist, and I'm not trying to call any individuals racist. I'm talking about systems here. Also, I don't believe that a minority can never be racist. I feel like if a person mistreats a person, judges them based on their skin color, no matter what, they're behaving in a racist manner. And then the last thing is that systemic refers specifically to systems and not individuals, although individuals do play a part in it, and that'll make sense as I go along. But these systems that have been put into place, and I'm going to use a personal example and historical recorded context to explain what I'm saying here. But these systems were established long before any of us were born, although there may be a few people who were born as early as 1933, 1935, who might be watching this video. Even though they may have been born, they wouldn't have been old enough to actively participate in these systems, or in the system that I'm going to use as an example. So, you know, we can't blame an individual. There's no one individual. There's no oftentimes people can be participating in these systems without even realizing it. But I am going to talk about some individual things and individual responses to those systems that sometimes we make, and we don't even realizing that we're participating in these systems. Okay, so the system that I'm going to talk about as an example that I have lived and I still see in that same community that I grew up in, that system is called redlining. And I'm going to read for you straight from a website called blackpast.org, and I'll put the link in the description below so you can go directly to it. But I thought it would be really beneficial for me to just read straight from that website how it describes this particular system, and then I'll tell you how it impacted me and still impacts my life. Okay, redlining refers to a discriminatory pattern of disinvestment and obstructive lending practices that act as an impediment to home ownership among African Americans and other people of color. Banks use the concept to deny loans to homeowners and would-be homeowners who lived in these neighborhoods. This in turn resulted in neighborhood economic decline and the withholding of services or the provision of services at an exceptionally high cost. The origin of the term stems from the policies developed by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC, created in 1933 by the Franklin Roosevelt administration to reduce home foreclosures during the Depression, and then institutionalized by the 1937 U.S. Housing Act, which established the Federal Housing Association, or FHA. Federal housing agencies included the HOLC and the FHA determined whether areas were deemed unfit for investment by banks, insurance companies, savings and loan associations, and other financial services companies. The areas were physically demarcated with red shading on a map. In contrast, zones which were to receive preferential lending status were marked in green shading and intermediate areas in blue shading. Often these decisions were arbitrarily based on the area's racial composition rather than income levels. While the practice was almost universally before 1968, the Civil Rights Act passed that year theoretically outlined redlining. And it's important to remember theoretically, because laws all by themselves do not stop racism from happening. Nonetheless, its impact was felt long after that date. In a series of Pulitzer Prize-winning articles which appeared in 1988 under the title The Color of Money, Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Bill Dedman, D-E-D-M-E-N, described how Atlanta, Georgia banks still discriminated by the racial designation of neighborhoods. His article illustrated how these banks were nearly twice as likely to lend to homeowners and prospective home buyers in low-income white neighborhoods as in affluent black areas. As a consequence of redlining, neighborhoods that local banks deemed unfit for investment were left underdeveloped or in disrepair. Attempts to improve these neighborhoods with even relatively small-scale business ventures were commonly obstructed by financial institutions that continued to label the underwriting as too risky or simply rejected them outright. When existing businesses collapsed, new ones were not allowed to replace them, often leaving entire blocks empty and crumbling. Consequently, African Americans in those neighborhoods were frequently limited in their access to banking, health care, retail merchandise, and even groceries. One notable exception to this was, and still is, the proliferation of liquor stores and bars, which seemingly transcended the area's stigma of financial risk. Redlining also led to an appreciable dearth of employment opportunities in these neighborhoods, as prospective small-scale employers were disinclined to locate there. Crime often followed in the wake of these declining neighborhoods, making future investment less likely. These developments created a cycle which seemingly justified the initial redlining practices. Okay, now I know I read a lot, but it just really did a good job of kind of painting the picture. And so you may wonder, you may think, well, that's something you read, and how can we know that for sure? And there's no law that says it's okay, so how can you prove it? All I can tell you is that this was my life. This has been my life, and this is how I grew up. And this happened for me way before I ever read this. So I read this just a few days ago. I didn't even know that this article existed, and I really didn't remember the phrase or the term redlining. And because of that, that just demonstrates that lots of people have experienced this, not just me. So let me tell you about my growing up. My parents were one of the first families to move into a white neighborhood in the 60s. And I think what year was in here? It said 1960. Yeah, it mentioned 1968 specifically in that article. So my parents moved into that neighborhood in 1968 when my brother was a baby. I was born in 1969. By the time I was in kindergarten, so, I'm 5 years old, it's 5 years later, the school that I went to, the elementary school, was half white and half black. And I know the high school was as well because a friend of mine showed me her yearbook. She graduated from high school the year that I started kindergarten. So I started kindergarten, that would have been in 1974, and then I finished in 1975 that spring. She graduated in 1975. Her high school was half white and half black. My elementary school was half white and half black. So I don't know if it was like this for you in elementary school, but for me, starting in second grade, we traveled around with the same group of people. So we were all in one homeroom in the first grade all day long, and then we started traveling. We had homeroom, but we also traveled around to like PE and music and speech and all of that. And so we traveled around with the same group based on your academic excellence. And so by the time I was in second grade, so some of these kids I was in kindergarten with, I was in first grade with. By the time we were traveling around in second grade, there were only 2 white people left in my class, and that was representative of the whole school. By the time I was in third grade, the last white person that I had traveled with, that I had known in school, moved away, and that was representative of the whole school. And not only did families move away, but so did the businesses. So when I was small, we had full shopping centers. We had multiple full shopping centers. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yes, it is the place of the race riots of 1921, but this is years later. All of the North Tulsa had multiple shopping centers, had movie theaters, had all of the chain stores. You know, we had Dillard's. Dillard's was before Macy's. We had everything that you would have commonly in different neighborhoods. But as the white community moved out, those businesses moved out, and then we would still have some fast food places. Like there was still a Church's Chicken, there was still a McDonald's, and I don't know if there was even 2 McDonald's. And Tulsa's not a small town. There was Arby's, you know, those were there. We eventually got Family Dollar. I'm trying to think what else. There was like a MedX that was a kind of a chain drugstore, and it eventually closed. Seemed like once we got a Payless, it was there for longer than most places, but it shut down, and that was way before. I mean, this is like years and years. I'm 51, okay? So this is years and years before Payless went through its closing of stores. But there was no Walmart. There was no Target. There's no movie theater. There's no bowling alley. There's no arcade back when there were arcades. You know, there's no Pizza Hut. None of that. There are really no now there were like a couple of doctor's offices. There was still a clinic in one area. I don't know if that clinic is still there. We didn't have any shopping malls either. No complete shopping centers. All those things were gone. You don't see any Best Buy. There's no Best Buy. There's no Starbucks. There's none of that. And not grocery stores either. And all of that stuff is gone. It's like a ghost town. And so then when you grow up in that, it's really, really painful. And you don't understand why that is. And my mom was an educator. She was a teacher. She went on to get her master's degree in more than 60 postgraduate hours, became a school counselor, got certified to be a principal. She was an educator. And like they said in the article, that the neighborhoods decline because there's nothing, you know, kids need stuff to do to stay out of trouble. And people see you differently when you live in neighborhoods like that. And you don't feel supported. And you feel lonely, and you feel like there's a big target on you for where you live and how you look. And you see people leaving, you see businesses leaving, and you see businesses not coming in. And every time you need to buy something of real value, you have to drive to the not black part of town. If you want to see a movie, you have to go to the other part of town. If you want to buy groceries, you got to go to the other part of town. And that is so painful and labeling. So I graduated from high school in 1987, and that was my neighborhood. When I came home from college on the weekends sometimes, or for the summer or Christmas break, that was my neighborhood. And then you may think, oh, well, maybe it's changed. No, it's not. My parents live further out in the country now, in a kind of country suburb, but I still own the property there in the neighborhood. And when I go, it is not better. It is not. All these years, it is not. Because when people speak of North Tulsa, it has a stigma of having nothing, of just being of no value. And sorry, I digress. When I was talking about my mom being an educator, she knew that if I went through the 5th grade in my elementary school, and she decided for me, she decided for my brother the year before that we were going to go to a middle school, which it wasn't middle schools yet then, it was still junior high and high school, that I was going to go to a magnet middle school for the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And at that time, and I don't know how magnet schools are across the country, but these two magnet schools, it was George Washington Carver Middle School and Booker T. Washington High School, were magnet schools that were intentionally set up to be 50% white and 50% other. And that school was in the north side of town. It was in the black neighborhood, and so was Booker T. Washington. And so I went from having kindergarten with half and half, to 2nd grade almost no white kids, to 3rd grade none at all, like in the school as far as I can remember, to then going to a school in the 6th grade that was intentionally half and half, which was great. And I went to their 6th grade and half of the 7th grade, because then my mom decided to send me to Catholic school after that, but that's another story. But I went to that school, and it was great. However, those kids rode the bus into the neighborhood to go to that school, and they rode the bus back into their white neighborhoods to go home. The overwhelming majority. So again, I don't want to speak as all or nothing, because that's just not usually the case. There's usually some in the categories that we think are absolutely one or the other. So the overwhelming majority of those kids, they still went back to their neighborhoods, in their white neighborhoods. They did not move. They didn't they may have gone to high school at Booker T, which was also half and half, but they didn't live there. They rode the bus there. They didn't move their families there. They didn't start businesses there. They didn't change the community there. And so everything just kind of perpetuates. And don't get me wrong, I'm not diminishing the value of having an intentionally integrated school. I appreciated that. What I'm saying is, if you think that changes this system of redlining, it does not. And then when my mom moved me to Catholic school, I went to a small Catholic school. It was sat in the middle of low-income housing. It was a church and a school. And at that school, it just happened to be very diverse, of people of different groups. There were some Latinx, there were some people from Fiji, there were some Asian students, black students, white students. There weren't nearly as many white students there. And so I had that experience. Then my mom was going to put me into for high school, a private Catholic high school. And again, my mom was just trying to make sure that I got the education that I should get, because she knew where the disparities were in education. But something didn't work out with some kind of plan at that school, and so I rode the bus to a predominantly white school on the white side of town, and actually the really wealthy side of town. When I say white side of town, I don't mean that there aren't white people who live in other parts of the city, just that side of town was overwhelmingly, predominantly white and overwhelmingly wealthy. And so I rode the bus to that school. And the disparity was really hard to stomach, not by them, but just when I would go to school, I felt comfortable at my school. I got a good education. I was treated well by my teachers. It was a good experience. But riding from where I lived to where I went to school, I saw that every day and I felt that every day. And my friends, I could go and do things with them because there was stuff to do where they were, but they never came to where I lived. Never, ever came to where I lived. And I don't knock them for that, and I wasn't mad at them for that. I understood that there was really nothing there for them. A lot of them had never even crossed the north-south border street of the city ever. And so I just wanted to share that experience. And so then when people try to say things like this don't happen anymore, I can attest to, yes, it does. And then the question may be, well, what do you do about that? You know, or what can I do about that? Or are people blaming me? I'm white. Is someone trying to say that I caused that, or just by being white am I causing that? No, as I said in the beginning, you did not set up that system. You did not design that mindset that sees things that way. You did not create that. But we all can do something. Now, exactly what that specific step is that changes everything, I can't say. But I can say that we have to realize that we are a very intentionally segregated society for whatever reason. Whether it's there's nothing there for me, why would I want to go there? Which I understand that. But something has to change where there shouldn't be a black side of the city and a white side of the city. There shouldn't be a disparity of how I see people because they live in this part of the city, because most of them are black, or if I find myself in a neighborhood where most of the people are black, where I get afraid, where I see black people in certain circumstances differently. And I know we want to believe that we don't do that, but we do, and not necessarily to be hateful, not necessarily to be thinking of, I want to think differently for people because they look differently, that's my intention, that's my choice, that's what no, it's part of just the way things are, that you can't not help but see things differently because they are so different. If we were always intermingled with people from different ethnicities, from people with different classes, with people from different backgrounds all the time, it wouldn't be that way, because we're used to being around each other all the time, and we're used to not seeing great differences and great disparities, and we're used to every neighborhood being, close enough to the same, but we're not. And so we all need to play a part in finding ways to be more integrated into each other's lives. And how we do that exactly is up to the individual, their situation, their circumstances, their surroundings, because everybody is not the same and everybody is not in the same place. Last thing I wanted to say is when you think of systemic racism, like things that are going on right now with the police department, you may have your own viewpoint of how police are with people based on your own experience, based on your community, your surroundings. But that is not necessarily the case for other people. And so when you say things in good intention, like, well, we want to support our police department, which is true, we do, because we do still need police. But when you say we want to support our police department and we don't want to tear them down because of a few bad police, to me that's not fair to say, because you don't know, and there's no way you can know if there are a few bad police. You don't know every police person. You don't know what goes on in every department. You don't know what goes on in every neighborhood. And again, I try to paint the picture that says people see people differently because there is such a disparity and such a separation. Now, not every person does. Again, there's no all or nothing. There's no everybody or nobody. Some people are going to do that and some people aren't. But there's no way for you to know if that's a few people, because to you, you may only see a few. You may only see what you see on the news, and you think, well, I've seen, you may count them. You may say, okay, in my lifetime or in the last few years, I've seen like 15, 20, maybe even 30 videos, and you think across the last 5 years that's, that's a few, relatively speaking, but those are only the videos you saw. Those were the only situations where there was a video captured. You have to know that there are more cases than that. And then in some communities, there are constant cases. And for me, pretty much every minority person in my life, my husband, my kids, my siblings, they have all been, the males have all been profiled and mishandled and mistreated by the police. And that's just in my family. From things that I have experienced with them, seen, that they've told me, that they've cried about. And so that feels very painful when someone says it's just a few, because again, you can't know that. And so it's better to say, we want to support the police. We want to have police for what we need, and we don't want to degrade all of the police, or we don't want to attack all of the police because of the bad ones. That way you're acknowledging that there are some bad ones, but you're not determining how many of those are and how big that impact is. And it may not be as big an impact in your community as it is for another. So I hope you guys heard my heart. I hope, God, I used the words that you gave me. But again, I'm imperfect. If you have any questions about anything I've said, if you want to talk further, please let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to have additional videos on other topics, let me know. But the thing I want to leave you with is try to listen to what the other person has to say, whether you're Black, white, Latinx, Asian, Native American, what have you. Everybody has different experiences. Like a friend was sharing with me recently that she grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood and was mistreated for being white in that neighborhood. That does happen. You can't negate it, even though you know that in America, overwhelmingly, it's the other way around. You still want to acknowledge someone else's pain. So we have to listen to each other and apply Matthew chapter 18. If you have an issue or a grievance with someone for any reason, be it for race issues or something else altogether, you go to that person and you talk to them and share your heart in a loving way and let them respond to you. So both the person who offended needs to recognize that they offended. Even if it was unintentional, you still need to acknowledge the person's pain. And the person who was offended needs to recognize and accept if the person was unintentional and explain to them so that they can do things differently. Now, I'm not talking about blatant, direct, calling people out of their name, calling them the N-word, and you Black people and all that kind of stuff. When people are very blatant about their racism toward me, I don't need to have a discussion with you. I'm gonna go pray for you, but I don't need to try to explain to you how what you did is wrong or that it was offensive. But whenever it's somebody that you have an inkling or you can tell there was not a motivation to do that, let's have a conversation, because it's about reconciliation. We want to come together and we want to make changes in this great nation. Thank you guys, and until next time, happy planning.